Hello and welcome to Humans of Reliability. It is Ashley here from Rootly, and today I am so excited to be joined by Adama Lorna. Adama, I'm actually just going to toss it over to you to introduce yourself and what you do.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. So, yes, I'm Adama. I'm based in London and I'm a site reliability engineer. I've been doing this for about the last 4 years. I kind of had an unconventional route into tech and into SRE, but here we are now. So yeah, that's the briefest probably intro ever. But I also make content. So it's something that I've done probably for almost as long as I've been doing SRE is creating content online. And over the last few years, also branching into tech related content across my platform. So that includes YouTube, that includes TikTok, bit of LinkedIn. And so, yeah.
Perfect. And we're definitely going to dig deeper into all of that stuff because Adama's content is how I discovered you. Although then we found out we've actually been at the same event at the same time
Yeah.
and we didn't get to meet. But anyways, something you touched on just now in your introduction, which I'd love to unpack a little, is kind of an unconventional route into SRE and into tech, which
Mhm.
although unconventional, I'd say it's not like super uncommon. I actually talk to a lot of
Mhm.
people who come from all different backgrounds. So you studied geography in university, and then found yourself going down a tech path. I'm curious, like, how did you first find out about SRE, and how did you decide it was something that was interesting to you?
Yeah. It's quite interesting because how it actually happened is I did a cloud engineering kind of boot camp style learning. So it's not quite a boot camp because I was attached to a company that kind of got us jobs afterwards. But so it was cloud engineering. So I learned to build applications, if you like, mainly Java applications. But we also learned how to deploy these into the cloud. So we also went through some of the things like CI/CD and infrastructure as code. So there was kind of a duality to it, building the applications, but also deploying them. And when it was time to kind of be myself to be kind of deployed to a company or contracted out, the first kind of offer that I was given was support. It was IT support. And look, for somebody who had no background in tech, could have been a great opportunity, but I didn't quite feel like it was going to be right for me. And so I actually declined that one and said that I think there might be something that's more aligned with me. And then they offered something called SRE, Site Reliability Engineering. And honestly, at this point, I had never heard of it. I didn't know what it was, which sounds kind of weird, but I had been introduced to cloud engineering and DevOps, but I hadn't heard about SRE. So even though obviously we could argue that they're quite closely related and, one feeds off the other, I didn't know what it was. And so obviously I've been looking at the job description. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like there's a little bit of programming and automation here. There's some, more DevOps based kind of work or practices. But there's also a lot about the cloud and still like deploying into the cloud and supporting applications there. I said, this sounds like a little bit of me. Like I do like that flexibility or that diversity of thought, of practice and so forth. So I was like, yeah, let's go for it. And so my first ever tech job was actually as an SRE, more in like a junior capacity, but that's pretty much how I got started. And so veering from geography and, graduating at that point is kind of in the pandemic and then deciding that maybe tech would be the route and then cloud engineering and then SRE. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, different path, but similar in that it wasn't, the incident response and reliability space wasn't something I was actively seeking, but more something I sort of discovered along the way. And I think as someone who also came from a non-traditional tech background, my studies were more in communications and things like that. I think a lot about this idea of like, and this is something that you do phenomenally well, like kind of holding the door open for others behind you and thinking about how do we make this space more approachable, and show people, I guess, just like a little bit more of what tech really is. I was also always a bad at math kid. So I think like pretty early on, I wrote off like computer science, like
Mhm.
STEM stuff as a potential career for me. So I'm curious just your thoughts on how people can make tech more inviting. Like how do we see more, women coming into the tech industry? Because as I'm sure SRE is unfortunately quite male dominated. How do you think people can just open the door a little bit and encourage more people to get curious about these really technical industries?
It's a great question, to be honest, and it's quite a complex one, right? Like, how do we get people who aren't aware of the opportunities in tech, and that they actually may be suited. Because I think this is also the gap, because it's one thing to hear about tech or jobs in tech or engineering, but it's quite easy to write yourself off. Like you just said, I'm not a maths person, so engineering isn't for me. Or, I've never been into, there's that kind of idea that people who are in tech have been coding in their basement since they were like 6 years old. And like, I'm not that person. So maybe it's not for me. But I think a big thing is people like me or people like you who come online and show that, yeah, there's not one kind of way to look in tech or one background to come from, right? And there are opportunities for a range of people. And I think not only should we, I think we actually have an obligation to bring more people into the tech space from diverse backgrounds. I actually think the future of tech and the growth of companies relies on this diversity of thought, right? And so having a background that may be different, like, sure, I didn't study computer science, but my background and what I've studied, and my exposure means that I can come into the space and potentially bring a viewpoint that is different to the other people, right? And that is often an asset when you are trying to solve novel problems, right? It's one thing to solve the problem that you've been trying to solve for ages, but like ones that we haven't actually yet seen, even like things with AI and the direction that we're going in with this and what that means for not only companies in the tech, but the people that will be served by it or that potentially will be impacted by it. So I think a big thing is just showing up also in an accessible way. If I show up and just start rambling on about Kubernetes, and if someone else is going to look at them, what are you talking about? I mean, people in the tech industry, when you start talking about Kubernetes, are already like, what's going on here? Like, so I think meeting people where they are is huge. So a lot of my channel isn't necessarily at the moment going into the nitty gritty of like I said, how to build out a pipeline or, how to support applications in production at a very, very low level. That's not really what it's about. This level here is about awareness and what it takes to get your foot in the door. And SRE, I think, is quite a complex one in the sense that I think it's quite hard for it to be an entry level job. This is one thing I'm always quite honest about. Like my route did allow me to go straight into SRE, but I also knew the path that I was on is not the usual one. This is why people always ask me, like, I can't see a junior level SRE job because it's not inherently a junior position. I think it is one that people assume that you have some background in whatever range it is. Like it may be that you come from networking or that you come from security or that you come from a DevOps engineering role and then kind of progress into it. But that doesn't mean that you can't be aware of it, because that may be the path that, you want to look forward to in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, once you do have a little bit more of a background, more experience. So yeah, showing up, being accessible, and I think also being on multiple platforms. So like not everybody's on LinkedIn. Some people are on LinkedIn, and that's great, right? A lot of people, as we know, prefer to view content in video format. So if you can show up on something like YouTube, some people need smaller bites of information at the beginning. That's why TikTok is great. So I'm finding myself trying to navigate these platforms at the moment. I will say I do have an affinity for YouTube. I've been doing it for like 5 years. Yes, if we can diversify how we show up and where we show up, I think that's going to be a good way to open the door for others and, allow them to come in with me. Because, yeah, the amount of questions I get about what is SRE, I've never heard of it. I've heard of a software engineer. I've heard of this sort of engineer. Never heard of this one. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or, I go to a lot of these events like KubeCon, for example, and this is no shade to KubeCon, but I'll tell you that the last KubeCon I went to in Paris, I could probably count the number of women I ran into on one hand. And it's like a 6,000 person conference. And it was like every time I would run into another woman at the booth or something, we'd be like, oh my God, hi.
Yeah.
How are you doing? It is so nice to see you. And I think that, that's part of what we aim to do with this series too, is showing that SRE, there are more roles even in this space of tech than specifically a site reliability engineer. There are ways you can bring other skills. And I think something you said that is really important is it's not just like because it's a nice thing to do. It's like the future of the industry depends on having different points of view. I've interviewed people in this series who, had a very traditional path where they're like, yeah, I grew up in San Francisco, got my comp sci degree at Stanford. First job at a university was Google, and I worked there for 16 years. And you're like, that's incredible. Like, I love that, there are people who have had that experience. But for a lot of people, that's just so far out of the realm of possibility. And that doesn't mean that there's not a place for you in tech. It just means that your path is going to look a little different. But I think something that's also important is that those different experiences aren't like a distraction. Like those are actually important things that you bring. I wrote a blog post not too long ago about what waiting tables taught me about working in tech and how those type of skills are actually really important. And I think you can see when we have teams or groups that lack those different perspectives. Like, you know, when you're in a meeting full of dudes who have definitely never had to navigate like some of those other type of careers. Like I'm like, I know you haven't waited tables in a bar or whatever. And
Yeah.
those perspectives are actually really important. And I guess like I'm wondering for you from your background in geography and all of these different things you do, like is there anything that stands out about the things that you've learned that you bring to your role in tech that gives you a different perspective?
Yeah, it's another really quite good question because one of the jobs I had, in fact, one of the things that the hiring manager said was, we're hoping that by bringing you in as well, like you'll be able to vocalize some of the work or the thoughts of what the team are doing because you may have some amazing engineers, right? And then I've worked with some amazingly talented people, but they're not very good at advocating for what they're doing or making connections like with other teams. And this is integral as an SRE, but also so many roles in tech, right? If you want the organization to go forward and cohesive in a cohesive way, then it requires communication like between teams. And so I can definitely say I think my background in perhaps maybe not geography necessarily, but I was a receptionist when I was at university. So that was very much a front facing role where I had to interact with people every day. Every time someone came through the door at the gym, I was there to greet them. But also I was an English teacher in Japan at one point. Like I've had to interact with a number of people in a number of roles, which has forced me to develop my skills in communication and conveying my ideas, but also conveying the work that as a team, what we're doing. Um, and so I think that is perhaps one of the most, I don't want to say powerful, but one of the most important skills that I think I bring into the tech world. I also think, though, having studied geography, and going back to that more specifically, and I usually joke about this, but geography is quite literally the study of the world. Like we studied so many different things, like human evolution, pollution of lakes, but also like big data, and things of this sort. So I think my ability to think quite broadly is very, very, very useful. But not only to think broadly in a disconnected way, but to make links between things. All right, that's something that I think is very valuable, almost in any job, but especially in tech when you can have these silos or these points where people are isolated and they're very good at doing their things over here or over here, but actually making those connections is very different. And that's often where progress is made or where solutions to problems can be found is when we make those very important connections. And I definitely think studying geography and then having a number of jobs before I got into tech helped me. So yes, I'm very happy that I took the path I did. I think back, would I have done computer science? Actually, probably not. Like I really, really loved my degree. I love the skills that I walked out with. Sure, there are things that are missing, probably from my knowledge base that would have been there if I had studied it, but I've learned it along the way, and I'm still here, sat, beside people who did do computer science. So we all find our way here, and then we bring what we bring to the table.
Yeah, totally. And honestly, like even when you do study it traditionally, this industry changes so fast that I had one of the guests I had on recently was talking about he got a computer science degree. It's kind of back in the day. The year that he finished his bachelor's in computer science was the year that the internet went online. And he was like,
Mm.
well, so much for almost everything I just learned. Like he was
Yeah,
about to
yeah, forget that.
like years of experience in tech. And he's like, honestly, that kind of happens every like 4 to 8 years. Some new piece of tech comes along that changes everything, anyways. So, having the foundations is good, but there are different ways to learn it. And there's all sorts of different trade offs with the skills that you can bring.
Yeah.
Um, I do want to talk more about your content creation because feel like you were like a little modest in dropping it before. So Adama has an incredible YouTube channel. You have a huge following. You've got over 100,000 followers like across your different platforms.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love the content that you create, and you cover everything from more SRE and tech focused things like job hunting tips for SREs, but also just like self improvement, overcoming self doubt, travel blogs, fitness routines, everything, which I think for one really is inspiring to me and embodies like a lot of what I'm trying to do with this series is showing like there's a lot of different people that work in reliability and they also don't like exclusively like you said like the basement coder like we do,
Yeah.
you know, people have lives, people are friendly. The industry is approachable and just full of normal people. So
Yeah.
to just like talk a little bit more about your channel and hear like how you think about it. Is it more of a creative outlet for you? Do you have specific goals in mind for your channel that you're working towards?
Mhm.
Yeah, talk to me about your content creation journey.
Sure. So I have two YouTube channels. The first one I started, like I said, I think almost 5 years ago now. And my kind of sole purpose was, well, actually, I say I have two purposes. The first was like almost a channel for my younger self. Like, what would I have liked to have seen? What would I like to have heard? And actually drawing on what you said about there is no one way to look, because I felt like there were people who were very smart, very academic, people you'd probably expect to be engineers, but I couldn't quite identify with them. I still cared, say, about things that maybe they weren't talking about, like fitness or like or self-help in terms of productivity and things like that. But on the other side, I still wanted to be able to talk about engineering and science or, you know, about making your way through the corporate world or even building your own businesses and so forth. So it was a letter to my younger self, if you like, but also how can I show up in a way that melds all of these things? And in all honesty, when you are not hyper niche from the start, your growth is slower. And it's something that I had to accept, but I was happy because I was like, sure, I could probably talk about one thing like fitness forever, but the likelihood of me being on this platform, say in a year, is very low, basically. And so my whole goal was to kind of infuse all of these things. And like you said, show that people can be dynamic. We are dynamic, right? We are not one dimensional beings. So, yes, I am a site reliability engineer, but I'm also somebody who's into powerlifting and I'm also somebody who's now oil painting and things of this nature. And the interesting thing is like I said, I really do believe in this diversification of experiences because with all of these experiences, they allow me to potentially be a better engineer or better content creator or better public speaker, right? These things find a way of melding together and almost like amplifying the other thing. So that's where the channel is. But I also knew that the community that I had built on that first channel might not be interested in the nitty gritty of SRE so much. And so I wanted a place where I could also go a little bit deeper into that. So that's why I started the second channel and where things like my webinar that I hosted, which was like, I don't know how long, maybe about an hour, where I could post things like that or speak more specifically about, you know, how to use AI as an SRE to optimize your work or, you know, how to actually use the skills that you already have in this job to apply for an SRE position, like how you may actually be sitting on a number of skills that would be great in an SRE team, but you just don't know, or you don't know how to articulate that. Because that's a big thing I think I've found is that people who will have these talents, they'll have skills, but they don't know how to communicate those skills. And often I find that sometimes the person who gets the job may not even be the most skilled person, but they are skilled in articulating it. And so this is where that side of my channel, my content creation came in. And then I also have my TikTok, which is more like shorter, more clippy versions of, you know, what I'm doing on both of those channels. And that's kind of how that whole medley of me on content or on socials has come about is through that channel. And then now more LinkedIn. In all honesty, I probably should talk a little bit more on LinkedIn. I did make a post once about like overthinking it. I think it's the platform I probably overthink the most in terms of, oh my gosh, there are professional people here. Like, I don't want to look stupid, but it's a great place as well. I think because obviously it's a professional platform in a lot of senses, and so you can access people in different ways. I know there are younger people who follow me on there as well, who may found me from other places, who are like interested in what I'm doing professionally and what I'm speaking about professionally, or like even things like this, which they may find through LinkedIn and so forth. So this is why I think that diversifying the platforms you're on as well can be very, very useful if you're aiming to get or attract a lot of people or people that may not see you in other places effectively, like, right. So yeah, that's pretty much my content creation journey. And in
Yeah.
terms, sorry, you asked like where I see it going. I do see it growing. I pour a lot into it. And I think longevity in content creation is challenging, but it's not if you genuinely enjoy what you're doing. I used to say to people, like, there's no way I'd be on YouTube 5 years on if I didn't enjoy this? There are times when you make a video and there's only like at the beginning 2 people watching it, and that person is like your mum and like your best friend that you forced to watch the video. So like if you can't get past those hurdles, you won't last very long. But I would love to do this more. I would love to integrate it more into what I do. That is my goal. Like I would love to reach more people in terms of the personal development stuff, but also the SRE stuff. I want to see more people in SRE who may not have even known that it exists, right? Who may be like me 5 years ago, like, what is SRE?
Yeah, absolutely. I find even for people who I know who have a decent understanding of tech, um, it's very common for people to have no idea what SRE is or not really know like reliability in the context of tech. And I think just
Mm-hmm.
like getting out there and talking about it is so important. And especially like you said, like people who aren't the exact like white Bill Gates guy wearing khakis doing the same kind of like presentation, like just we need to show that there has been changes in the industry. Don't discount yourself as like not working in tech because you don't fit this very specific idea of like what a software engineer and SRE looks like. Yeah, I just think it's so important. And something I've actually noticed in doing this series is I reach out to a lot of women in particular. Like I always try to, make sure that I have a mix of voices, but more often than not, when I reach out to women, they're more likely to be like, "Oh, I'm not like senior enough," or things like that. And I'm like, "That's fine. Like you don't need to be to be
Yeah.
interested." We are quicker to say like, "Oh, I don't think I'm qualified or senior or whatever." But that is not the case at all. And there's actually so much value in people who are earlier or mid stage in their career coming out and saying like, "This is what it's like to get started," or, "This is what has helped me become more productive," just whatever it is. It's really
Mm,
exciting to see more people getting out there and sharing stories. And that's what's so cool about YouTube and channels that you can just create your own space in. You don't need like some big platform. You can just build your own. Although I
exactly.
do think that LinkedIn is particularly hard.
Yeah.
It was like I actually ran into an old friend of mine yesterday at the park. Our kids are close in age, so we ended up at the park at the same time, and we were chatting. And he was like, "Oh, I love like seeing the stuff you're doing on LinkedIn." And I sort of have these moments where I'm like, "Oh my God, you can see that."
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
It's like in
Yeah.
real context because I just kind of think of LinkedIn as like posting into the void because it's like
Yeah.
I kind of have to for what I do and I want to put out the content, but there's sometimes that like fourth wall that breaks and you're like, "Oh God."
Yeah. Oh,
Don't
wait. You mean
in real
people
life.
who, yes, I completely get that, to be honest. Like sometimes people say to me, like, oh, I really enjoyed like your latest YouTube video. And I was like, wait, you watch me? Like, not people who know me, like you said in real life. No, no, no.
Who knows
And so
the
this,
last
yeah, that cringe. It's hard to kind of get over that. I feel like even after 5 years, sometimes I'm still like, oh no, don't do that. Don't watch me. Like,
no.
yeah, yeah,
That's not for you.
yeah,
That's the
exactly.
internet, the big kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
anonymous.
exactly
Um,
that.
yeah, something you also touched on, this is the last question I have kind of lined up, is this idea of like we're often pressured to like have a niche or like if you're an SRE and you're making SRE content, you're just making SRE content and it has to be technical and it has to be this. And I saw you put out a video not too long ago about kind of pushing back of this idea that like you don't necessarily need to have this super specific niche. And when you sort of free yourself of this idea and you start just pursuing things that are interesting to you and talking about them, sometimes you can even find that they do actually align together. There's like an introspection process there where you might notice, even though, say oil painting and fitness and lifting and all these things might not necessarily seem related, you can kind of find these common strings that can help you get to know yourself better and identify things that might be interesting to you. Like when I do that, I think I like cooking, I like drawing, I like reading, and then I sort of find this like, oh, theme that I enjoy things that are creative. I enjoy creating something, like building something, putting things together to make a bigger picture. And that's actually helped me understand the type of work that I might find fulfilling. So I guess like, is this something that came to you very naturally? Have you always had a lot of hobbies and interests? Or have you sort of had to unlearn this idea that like you have to pick a thing to be good at?
Yeah, it's a great question to us. Been exploring this on my channel and having like that particular video, I think has over 200,000 views, and people in the comments just being like, oh my gosh, I thought it was just me. Like, I thought it was just me who had multiple passions and interests or things they wanted to explore. But I'd say, I think from a young age, I was definitely encouraged to just like lean into my interests. Like, I did dance, but I was also very good at the sciences when I was in school and geography. And um, even when I made that decision to not necessarily do medicine, even though, you know, the grades were there, I instead chose to do geography. And having that, I think, support and encouragement from a young age, even if it wasn't explicitly my mom or my dad saying, you know, you can do anything, like you can do any passion or interest you want, or you can explore it. Just that support, and whenever I said I wanted to do something, pushing me to do it, cool, go for it, allowed me to be a free thinker in that sense from a young age. That didn't mean that I didn't have the challenges though of like, oh, everyone's niching down. And by niching down, you do have velocity. You have a direction that you are going in and you can go with, you know, with more speed effectively. Like you can go faster because your resources are concentrated in one thing, which is one thing I spoke about in that video is you do have to accept that if you are going to give yourself time to explore and dive deeper into these things that you're curious in, then you are on a logical level dispersing your resources across multiple different sectors, if you like, or dimensions of yourself. So initially your growth may be slower, right? Like if you compare me to someone who's probably been going hard on SRE and, you know, cloud for the last 5 years, to me, who's also been doing content and who's also been doing oil painting and lifting and all these other things, as well as SRE, sure, they probably may be a lot further than me in terms of how many professional qualifications they have or how many programming language they have. But I will, like I said, I come to the table with a different set of skills and a different outlook. And I am encouraging people to explore that, not to the detriment of, you know, having to exist in a world where, you know, there is some level of mastery and proficiency that is required to get a job, right? Like it's all well and good saying just be good at everything, but at the same time, people pay you often to do a role. But I think if we actually just started appreciating people who do have this and actually acknowledging the power of people who do have a diverse set of thoughts, beliefs, and information sources, then we would encourage people to dive deeper into their curiosities. Because it's funny because we also put those sorts of people who make new breakthroughs, we put them up on a pedestal, right? Those people who can make new connections between like, I think the example I gave was maybe like a renewable power source or like a piece of engineering or like, you know, autonomous driving, which is a combination of multiple things. And yet we dampen down people at an early age. I mean, like, okay, it's time to narrow in now. You've got one thing to learn. You go from like school where you have all these subjects, to sixth form in the UK where you've got now 3, 4. Now it's one thing at uni. Boom, go. That's your path. And it's why actually one of the reasons I do like the liberal arts kind of view that I've seen more in the States. But yeah, I think creating more well-rounded individuals is going to be key in a world where we have all these new technologies that are emerging and things that may take away from the specialty that you may have as an engineer or as whatever sector. If now potentially we can use certain types of technology to do part of your work, that thing you've specialized in, and you don't know how to transfer your skills, your knowledge, and more importantly, your ability to know and apply information. If you haven't been transferring that across, you may now in the face of this new technology be like, I don't know what to do. I say I've been a Java developer my whole life. I can do that amazingly. But now we have some tech that potentially can also write some Java code pretty well, right? And may actually start to take on some of that work. Now, what do I do? Whereas if you're a person who has been playing around with things and actually understanding themselves and the way they learn and how to apply knowledge, you're like, this is cool. This is a potential opportunity. Maybe now that this particular piece of technology can take off some of the work that I was doing on a lower level, I can start, you know, working on other things, maybe more higher level things, making new connections for the company or for my business or for my content or whatever it is. And this is why I am definitely always going to be an advocator of this kind of approach to life. And like you said, that the synergies that you can kind of spot become really interesting. Like you spoke about, you know, working out that's actually the act of creation is something that you like across the board. And then you can find work that aligns with that. But like in a similar way, like I enjoy programming and I enjoy what I do as an SRE, but I also enjoy oil painting and I also enjoy content. Well, there's a level of fine detail and attention to detail in all of those things, or there can be in how you execute them. So perhaps I like the type of work that allows me to dive deeper into those things and to work with my knowledge and my expertise or my experiences to draw out that detail and to create something of value, right? Or maybe it's storytelling. Like I've noticed that I like speaking in a lot of context. So perhaps then that common thread that I've seen amongst my interests, my passions, my experiences, then I can dive deeper into in terms of my work, in terms of how I want to impact the world. But if you never explore, then how will you know? If you've just been siloed into one thing from the start, good at science is going to be a doctor, fabulous, that's it. How do I know that though? That maybe scientific communication was more the thing I was interested in. Maybe I wanted to be on TV, right? And like I said in one of my videos, the next David Attenborough. Like maybe that was what my path was supposed to be, but because I was shoved down this one, I never got to explore. Anyway, I can talk about this forever, so I'm gonna stop there. But yes.
It's so true. And I think it's such a healthier way to sort of form an identity because, especially in this day and age, it's very easy to say, like, I am an engineer and this is a big part of my identity. And then one day you get laid off and suddenly, am I an engineer? Like, what's like, it can be when you couple these like specific things that you do to become sort of your whole identity, when it goes away or when it changes, it can be really challenging. But if you're able to, say, I am an analytical person, I'm a puzzle solver or whatever it is, there's all these different ways that you can channel those things. And, like you said, sure, you might get a lot of velocity going down one specific path, but then you also have that inertia where what if you decide maybe you want to try something else, or you start to question if that's the thing you want to do forever. It's a lot harder to get off of that path when you haven't actually had the practice of exploring some different things. And I think that can lead to some of those really difficult like career crossroad moments where maybe you want to try something else, but you're so far down one road that you don't know how to switch.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I could also talk about this forever. But I know we are pressing past our recording time already. These interviews go by so fast. Thank you so much, Adama. It's been, as always, such a pleasure to chat with you. Hoping that next time I'm in London or something, we can have a nice conversation in real life because I always enjoy hearing your thoughts. But until then, I get to watch your YouTube videos.
Yeah, I'm still on YouTube. So yeah, until then, it's been lovely. Thank you, Ashley.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time on Humans of Reliability.